Expansive and Unscripted Live. I am super excited to be here today with Dr. Raquel Garzon, who is joining me. Um, she's just a really incredible human. So I'm so excited that we get to share conversation with the rest of you. She's the founder of Revitalize Project, using neuroscience to really transform leadership and kind of how workspaces are existing. And yeah, I think I'm gonna turn it over to Raquel. How do you like to identify yourself?
Well, I think it just depends on who I'm talking with, the audience. But generally, I consider myself to be an entrepreneur. I like to think of new ways to communicate information or to relate to people, and then use anything that I might have in terms of experiences or expertise to help either individuals or organizations thrive. I consider myself to be a mom, so that's one way that I'm a
Mhm.
parent. I would describe myself. I think that's an important part of my identity. I uh, being Latina, being a first generation born here in the U.S. to immigrant parent and a political asylee or refugee parent, and then uh, more recently, maybe we'll get into this or not, but I began to identify as bisexual around the age of 18, and then at the age of 49 realized I was a lesbian, came out as a lesbian. And so for me, that's an important part of my identity because of the journey that I've been on, and many things that happened along the way. And then also becomes more obvious the more you talk with me and know me, is that I'm autistic, ADHD, so neurodivergent. It really is. It's been with me my whole life, even though I was diagnosed around the age of 37.
Mm.
But it makes my whole life make sense before that time, and it's really constantly. I mean, it's part of who I am, so it's constantly with me, and I think it, obviously has. In a neurotypical world, there are things that are harder to do, but then there are things that I feel like I can do that are um, pretty amazing. So that's that's what I would say. And Jennifer, thank you
Yeah.
so much for inviting me, because I think you're amazing. I've seen you on LinkedIn and watched some of your live streams and the things that you're doing in neuro inclusion and just how authentic and vulnerable you are. I'm really honored to be here with you.
Thank you. I'm so excited. Selfishly, this show is just so I get to talk to like really amazing neurokin and then just share those conversations with other people because I think they're amazing. So um it's just, yeah, I'm loving the conversations that I'm having. I've recently had a conversation with a librarian, and so we were nerding out about like access to all the information and just kind of navigating navigating this reality of being a person. I'm also autistic, ADHD, and and I don't know if you find this, but I find I am continually fascinated by new information, and I want to learn all the things, run into some problems because especially in the art area, I'm like, "Ooh, I want to learn a new like art technique. Let me get all the supplies and, you know, super zoom in focus with this one art technique." And then several months later, I'm kind of done with it. But I've learned, let me save all those things so
Don't
that
scare me, Jennifer. I just got into resoning and I'm obsessed. I love it, but it's
it's
expensive, so I
amazing.
cannot give it up 2 months from now.
It's amazing. Yes, enjoy it, relish it, and also, like, don't get rid of any of your supplies because, like, a year later, you might be like, "Ooh, yeah, resonating, I wanna come back to that." Yeah, so tell me some of the stuff you're resonating.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm a beginner. So I just started around, I want to say November. So it's only just a few months old. And, I started with some really like simple molds, and experimenting with, the typical things. I've watched so many tutorials. And the first ones were pretty simple, but I was proud of myself.
Yeah.
It's a long process, right? There's a lot of
Mm.
work that goes into it. But now I've moved on to creating bigger things and more functional things like bottle openers and vases. And now I'm going to be doing some lamps with like
Ooh.
lights in it. It's amazing what you can do with resin. But then of course I don't know if this is my ADHD brain, but then I'm like, ooh, what happens if I do this? And it's like, I'm acting as if I'm some expert and I'm just starting to like go off the rails instead of just sticking with, your standard kinds of things. I'm already like, ooh, let me try this and see what happens here.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I can never just stay in the lane and just do that. And so I'm scrounging around the house and using like sprinkles for cupcakes. And then I went into the garage and I got nails and bolts and stuff, and I created some things with those sorts of things.
I
And
love
yeah, I'm
it.
just scrounging up stuff and doing all kinds of experiments.
It's so fun. That sounds amazing. I I like turn into kind of a wild scientist when I'm in art projects. I remember there is this I've been into relief printmaking, so carving blocks and then printing them. And there was one prompt. I honestly can't remember what the prompt was, but I decided that I needed to like make my own ink out of coffee and honey.
Mm.
Um, I don't know why. Like I was like, this whole thing needs to be organic. So I had like this organic handmade paper, and like I ground up like dehydrated coffee and honey and mixed it into a
Did it work?
paste to be an ink and like rolled it on. Yeah, I mean it's like not amazing, but it did print. And so I was like,
Wow.
when those things happen, I don't know how you feel, but when I have those like wild scientists, like I created something,
Oh, I
it's
love it.
it's
That's why I say
so
I'm an
exhilarating.
entrepreneur, like of life, of anything.
Yes, yes, it's so exhilarating. And when you're talking about going around the house collecting things, one of the other things I like to do is gel printing, which I don't know
Mm.
if you've ever seen that, but it's like the squishy gel plate that you roll paint on, and then you can put anything on it. So I'm constantly like taking stuff out of the recycle bin. I'm like, ooh, this netting from the fruit, I could put that down and then print, and that would make a really cool texture. Or
Oh yeah, I've seen
this,
people do it. I've seen.
yeah.
I am not that artistic, so that I admire that. That's cool.
Oh, it is just like it really takes zero skill. It's like you have leaves in your backyard. Okay, put them on the gel plate and and print them.
I knew you
And
and
it's
I were like, connected here because I'm like, no, 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 don't put that in the recycling bin. I'm gonna use it. And so then you have all of this collection that you have to like, you're almost embarrassed by like the things that you save because it borders
mhm,
maybe on like collecting junk or something to other people. But I have a vision. Like I can see that there are things I can do with this.
yes.
But like you, it's too much. Like I take on too much and I have too many ideas and I'm constantly searching things and wanting to learn more about things. And I always say like it's hard for me to understand when people say they're bored
Oh my gosh,
because
yeah.
I have to work to turn my brain off. So I have to sometimes put like Netflix on in the background or
Mhm,
something just to
yeah.
disrupt my thoughts because I'm not good at multitasking. Like I can't do two things at once. And so I put that on to just shut my brain up because if
Mhm.
not, I will just keep looking for stuff, doing stuff. And I realize that it just becomes too much. And so this interest then becomes an obsession and then it gets in the way of me having, like me doing the stuff I'm supposed to be doing. So
It's such a challenge, right? Because those creative outlets, I think like my mind is most quiet when I'm making art. I call it my mind vacation because I'm focused on
Mhm.
that. And so all the noise of like, what about this? What about that? How do we solve this problem? That quiets and I'm just focused. And so there's like benefit in that, right?
Mhm.
And also I can, get lost for hours in those kinds of activities and, yeah, forget about, some of the adulting things that I need to be doing. So it's challenging, but I'm thinking about as we're talking and realizing, a lot of times people talk about like what it takes for a person with ADHD to be engaged and, focus.
Mhm.
And I forget the acronym, but there's like 4 or 5 things, and one of them is it novel?
Mhm.
And so I think
Yeah,
that's what's
novelty
so
and
appealing, like, "Ooh,
saliency. It's got to be salient in some way.
something
Really
new."
appealing, And I
Yeah.
think that the appealing part about art is that you don't have constraints and limitations. So one of the things that I struggle with, and I think maybe part of the reason that I'm an entrepreneur is I don't like having constraints that to me don't make sense. Too many
Yes.
rules that I understand. I'm a rule follower from the perspective of I think that there's really important rules that make a society function or that are for safety. But apart from that, I don't like too many constraints. I like to be able to broaden. And so I think that in art, the appealing part of it is that you don't have constraints. Maybe we should, right? But maybe it's just financial ones in terms of the ingredients, right? But I love that aspect, and there aren't so many things that suck me into a state of flow, where
Mm.
time just goes by and you have no idea that it went by. You have no concept of time. First of all, I don't really relate to time, so I struggle just in the
Yes.
world because I feel like if I'm having a conversation and something's going really well and there are still things that we're talking about and learning, then why do we have to put an end to that? And then there's times that we schedule stuff and I'm like, this is so useless or like a waste of time. Why do I have to be here? And so
Yes.
I just feel like time it's this made up thing, right? That we we use.
Yes.
And I really struggle aligning to it. And so I'll just tell people when we have a meeting, like at the beginning, like I have no concept of time. When I'm presenting, if I'm in flow, forget about it. I'm not looking at my watch. I'm in my moment. And so I
Yes.
just tell people I will not be offended if you just tell me like you're done. Just shut up. Like take a hook and pull me off stage or whatever it is, or say hello, we need to end this meeting, because my brain doesn't associate with that. So I love the feeling of just not having to worry about time. I don't have my phone, I don't have anything, and hours could go by and I'm mindful, I'm there. And I
Mhm.
think that we spend a lot of time, somewhere else, and I just like that feeling of being present.
Yes. Yes, it is a grounding experience for me too. Um, and yeah, I so relate to how you're talking about time. There's so many things that like oftentimes I will describe feeling like I am this multidimensional being having to exist in a two-dimensional space, and it is continually frustrating because like my brain and so many parts of myself exist outside of the construct of this reality. And I hear that also from so many other neurodivergent folks that it's like, yeah, what is time? I don't know. It feels so luxurious if I have a day where there is nothing scheduled. I protect that. I guard it with my life. And if somebody's like, "Hey, what are you up to?" I'm like, "Nope, I have plans." My plans are that I have no plans.
I probably need to do that more often because I'm always like, "Ooh, what could I do today?" And for me, I think I used to do a lot of activities that were mindful that were exercise related. So mountain biking is an example. Mountain biking here where I live in southern New Mexico, cactuses everywhere. We're in the desert. It's very mountainous. We're at altitude here, and you fall and you're going to fall into some form of a cactus plant, and probably multiple ones. I've had so many cactus needles inside my body. So there's this need to be mindful. You cannot be distracted for a second. But because of some health conditions that I've had, and I've had several dislocations, and anyway, I have to go to the Mayo Clinic several times a year. I have had to cut back on a lot of the activities, exercise wise, kickboxing, Latin dancing, the mountain biking, that fulfilled that for me. And so I knew that I was missing something. I just felt so awful not having these activities, and it's part of my identity. And so I think that some of the art and some of the things that I'm doing now are my new outlets, where it's hard to dislocate my shoulder when I'm doing resin, right? I mean, sometimes my back hurts, but I found these other outlets. And for me, being a scientist, all my degrees are in sciences. Working in labs as a graduate student, I really didn't have experience in music and art and those sorts of things. I just didn't have that exposure or upbringing. And I always believed I didn't have this artistic, creative side. I think my creativity would come out in my science, right? Science is an art. And
Yes.
so I've learned recently, as I've gotten into the arts, and then I actually did theater also for the first time, which was like a huge bucket list for me, because growing up, I was extremely shy, and I was very self-conscious of myself. And I always would watch the other kids who were in drama in high school on stage, and I would say, I would love to do that, but I would be mortified being vulnerable and having people look at me and judge me. And people don't believe I was shy. I had trouble even placing an order, at a restaurant. I did not like that at all. And I have just discovered this whole other side of me that I had no idea existed. This, not just, from an art perspective, but the theater and how alive I felt. I was always a person that was like, how can you major in theater? What do you do with that? How do you make a living? And when I was in the theater, it was around October, I just thought, I totally get it. I get why people would wait tables to do this. I feel so in my body and in my mind, and so just, wow, it was an amazing experience. And I'm a huge theater fan. I have season tickets to Broadway here. And, but being in it, and it was like silly. I wasn't even like a main role or anything, but it was an experience that I think really showed me that there's science and art and science like never before. And I think it's going to benefit the things that I do professionally.
That's so amazing. So a theater is a recent addition to your activities.
Yes.
This isn't something,
Last year.
because you said like October. I'm like, that's just a
Yeah.
few months ago.
Yes.
That's that's so amazing. I mean, it takes so much courage to try new things anyway, and then something like that where you're trying new things in front of other people. That's super vulnerable and courageous, and I absolutely admire that. And I'm
Thank you.
curious, how do you feel your so we've talked about being late identified neurodivergent, and so there's lifetime of masking involved, and I'm just curious, like, how does that, like, do you feel like those experiences of masking have informed your acting abilities?
I never thought about that. I look back at, before being diagnosed, and, I always knew that I was eccentric. Let's just put it that way, and I know that people would say that about me. And I think there were some positives, and then maybe even, some negative aspects of it. When I look back, I think, some of the masking that definitely stands out to me are things like pretending I would get jokes or understand, some of those sorts of
Mhm.
metaphors or language that is not as literal. And I just struggle with those sorts of things. I think I'm getting better. It's like knowing why you struggle, I think helps you to
Mhm.
then understand what you need to do. So a lot of times I'll read a joke and I don't get it. And so then I'll read it backwards. I'll read it from the bottom up. I know that's a strange, maybe concept, but somehow when I read it backwards, I understand it. So I look back and I would just, ha ha ha, follow along because I just felt like, why does everyone get this except for me? And
Mm.
then I think some of the social aspects, I didn't know that a lot of people who are neurodivergent and maybe especially females tend to basically learn. You're watching what people do. I'm a big people watcher, so I'm a
Yes.
behaviorist. I help people with human behavior. And so I notice patterns and I notice nuances. A lot of times there's an assumption that neurodivergent people don't notice things, but sometimes
Mhm.
we notice things that no one else does. And you learn those things. And so then you begin to mimic. We've got mirror
Mhm.
neurons, we've got all kinds of built in systems to
Mhm.
mirror, to create safety and to create connection because we depend on it for survival. And so I didn't realize how much I used that to survive and to maneuver social situations. The problem
Yeah.
with that is that I also learned some what I would consider to be not as great of behaviors because you have people that are also modeling things that get promoted. I
Mhm.
think there are a lot of leaders, especially traditionally, that get promoted who are authoritarian, who are, tough. And looking back, when I look at some of the positions I had, I'm mortified sometimes at some of the behaviors that I really mimicked and learned as a leader. And
Mm.
I think that the diagnosis helped me to take a step back and say, who am I
Mm.
authentically without copying or mimicking others? And I think that the hard part about that it's really hard for me to mask now. So I come across as more symptomatic. Let's just call it that. It's not
Yes.
symptoms because it's not a disease, right? Like I don't, but if we're just looking at it from a neurotypical perspective, I appear more autistic than I have before. And
Mhm.
somehow with the diagnosis and really to know myself, I struggle to mask. And I think part of it is a conscious decision not to spend my energy on that because I realize how much it exhausts me. And I'd rather spend my
Mhm.
energy on something else. It requires a lot of cognitive effort to mask. And then what
Yes.
happens is it takes away from something else. And I'm like, I can't do that anymore. I'm not doing this for you. I need to spend my cognitive effort on something that matters to me.
Yes, because we have this awareness of how limited that cognitive energy is.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm not wasting it on that. I resonate with what you're saying because in my experience of being identified in my early 40s, it was I too like became more of these things after identifying.
Mhm.
And it's confounding to some people close to me. They're like, you used to be able to do all kinds of stuff. Why are these things a problem? Like, I used to be a spoken word artist on stages in Los Angeles, and I used to organize all kinds of events with like arts events in the community and run art festivals through the whole weekend, being at
Wow.
a table. And I'm like, how did I do that? I
Mhm.
can't even imagine like 1 hour at a table at an art festival, let alone like organizing and being present for the whole thing. And so it really it really highlights to me how powerful masking is,
Mhm.
because when we no longer, like for me, coming into this identity of autistic and ADHD made me realize, oh, I'm not a failed human. I'm just not neurotypical or
Mhm.
neuronormative,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm like a perfectly fine autistic ADHDer.
Yeah.
And that was so liberating to have that shift, and I no longer like there was no more pressure to perform like everybody else. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, this is me. So I'm done pretending or or performing what growing up I thought like this is how you're supposed to be. So I
Exactly.
guess that's what I'm gonna try doing. Um
I love that.
and
We
so
have a comment, Jennifer, here, just based on what
mm,
you said. I don't know if you can see it, so I'll just read it to you. But Jen Oz
yeah,
said it can look like regression, but it's actually progress in being
yes.
ourselves. And I think that's
Yes.
so true. Like a neurotypical world might say, like, oh, you've lost capacity. And I actually felt that about myself. I was like, what? I'm getting old, like because I turned 50 and it was like, it's just a number. It's one more year, right? But there's something psychological at the same time that I am choosing, or maybe just I'm not going to mask anymore. And I felt like, oh my gosh, like this age is really catching up with me. But I think it's a choice. You choose how you're going to navigate the world. And I want to navigate the world as myself, and I want to be accepted as myself. And so, yes, to the others, thanks, Jen, for posting that. It looks like
Yes.
regression, but I know for myself, it is progress. I wouldn't be able to do some of
Yes.
the things I'm doing now if I were still masking and mimicking.
Yes, I love that, and thank you, Jen, for that comment. I am not able to see it, so thanks for reading those, Raquel.
We have a
Um,
question there. So whenever you get a chance, Jennifer, I can read that too.
okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say real quick, even as a therapist, when I was practicing more full time, I often said to clients like, "Look, there's gonna be things where you feel like you are moving backwards and functioning, because when we come out of survival and into like moving in the direction of thriving, we begin to feel things that we didn't have time or space to feel in survival mode. Like sometimes things like hunger and pain and
Mhm.
things that we just like, okay, I gotta put it out of my head because I have to keep going forward. And so things might feel like slower because you're pausing to notice yourself and to take care of yourself in ways that are not always happening in survival mode. And I feel like that's very similar. I'm totally blanking on the name of the book, and I'm sure somebody can help us out. But Dr. Devin Price has has a book on I think it's unmasking, maybe some, I don't know, but they talk about how for some people even gender has been masked. So
Mhm.
as they're coming into their neurodivergent identity and
Mhm.
unmasking, that's why we see so many people being like, yeah, yeah, gender's fluid. There's
Mhm.
there's a very strong correlation between neurodivergence and gender expansiveness,
Correct. And
partly
sexual
because
orientation also not being
right,
just hetero. Yes.
right, because these are things that we are taught that we're supposed to be, so
Mhm.
we mask them
Mhm.
until we get hopefully to some place where we are allowed to say, well, no, what really is me? And I think about it, I always imagine it like like this kind of self archaeology of uncovering layers, and like, oh, there's this beautiful intricately carved thing. Okay, we got to be careful brushing away the dirt. um and maybe at first it just looks like this clump of mud, but as it gets more and more cleaned off, you see more of the intricacies of the carving, because those layers that have been like imposed upon it are coming away.
I
And so
love
I
that.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think
I
that's
love
where
your metaphors. I can picture them. I'm a very visual person, so I always have those
yes,
pictures in my head. I like
Yes.
what you're saying about survival because I teach a lot. I mean, everything I teach is from the neuroscience perspective. And when you look at survival mode, part of survival mode and a coping mechanism is to make connections. So you might become a people pleaser. You might let go of some of your boundaries.
Mm,
It's like being on that show Survivor. It's like, I don't want to get voted off the island type of thing. And so
yeah.
I'll negotiate deals. I'll give up a little part of myself if it's going to be make me survive, right? So that's a
Yeah.
survival technique. And as you move from surviving to thriving, what's going to happen is that people aren't going to like it to some
Right.
degree, right? Because when you're thriving, it means that you're not willing to give up some of the things that really matter to you, that make you who
Exactly.
you are for the sake of someone else anymore. You don't feel like you need to cling to certain groups or
Hmm.
people to survive. You find your people, or you find that within yourself, because we all have what we need to be whole and complete. I always, teach that in my programs. And so as you're making that move from surviving to thriving, you're unlearning. So it's not just
Mm,
adapting or shifting. I mean, you literally have to unlearn behaviors, completely unwire things that have been wired together from a neural pathway perspective to free them
yes.
up, to rewire those in a way that is you, reflects who you are, not what others want from you. And that is a process. So when I feel sometimes like I'm going backwards, I remind myself
Mm,
that going backwards oftentimes is necessary, because if you're on this wrong path and the fork was way back here, you're never
yeah.
going to get to where you're supposed to be unless you go backwards. And in dancing, you have to go backwards to, it's a
I
cha-cha,
love that.
it's a salsa, like there's always backward moves. And so I really love what you're saying there. And sometimes I think people panic when they get into that mode.
Mm,
They say, people are rejecting me. I feel like I lost business, doing some of
hmm.
these moves, because I'm not willing to compromise what I think is important or my values to consult with
Yeah.
a client who doesn't align with that. And so there is some rejection, and it's hard to move through that, because as humans, you don't like it. It is a
Yes.
it's a threat. And so then we go, okay, I'll do whatever you want. Okay, okay, okay. And there we go. We've given ourselves up once again. And then
Hmm.
somewhere inside, we know we've done that, and it sits with us and it eats away at us in some way. So when you look at some of the coping mechanisms, right, that we have for that, I think it makes sense. So I really
Yeah.
like what you're saying. Should I get to the
Yeah.
question here? Because it's
Yeah.
really massive.
Yeah.
Let me just read that, because now I'm like, oh my gosh, there's more stuff here. Okay, so this one says, I'm a professor who trains many students interested in pursuing biomedical post Bachelor of Science degrees. What do both of you recommend on how to best mask mimic college students with great cognitive potential to better prepare to enter graduate training environment? So how to best mask or mimic. Oh, I just want to change all the systems so that they don't have to mask or mimic. That's my initial response, is right. Like, you, Jennifer,
Yes.
have an amazing business where you go in and you help organizations, I'm assuming academic institutions,
Hmm.
implement from A to Z everything from systems to processes to culture to training that makes their organization or institution neuro inclusive,
Yes.
meaning we don't have to put people into boxes for them to be
Yes.
here. And I hate when people say, let's see if they're a good culture fit. Maybe your culture needs to change. And so
Yes.
it's right. Like, we don't necessarily want people to fit into the culture. We want people not to fit in because maybe your culture needs to shift. I
Yes.
don't know. That's just my initial
Yes.
on that. What do you think?
Oh, I'm with you on that. I just kind of like winced internally
Mhm,
at like I understand the need for the question,
mhm,
sadly,
mhm,
and I winced thinking about like I don't want to teach anyone how to mask.
mhm,
I want to teach them how to be able to navigate systems, right? There's like this both and work. There's the work of teaching institutions how to be neuro inclusive, and also there's the work of working with other neurokin to, okay, how do, this is a system that is, we're slowly chipping away at it,
Mm-hmm.
but until it changes however many generations down the road, this is what we have to work with. So how do we work within the system,
Mm-hmm.
caring for ourselves, accommodating ourselves, protecting ourselves, so that we are not burnt out by the system. And this is something it's just been in the forefront of my mind lately, reading so many narratives and hearing so many people that I know who are in leadership, who are in academia, um, dealing with burnout, that like the demands to try to keep up with
Mm-hmm.
neuronormativity
Yeah.
is untenable, and it's too much. And so I think about, there's clients that I work with who are in university, and we talk about, okay, what are some strategies for taking care of yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you may not be able to unmask everywhere, so you have to make sure, where are the places that you can unmask? Is that in your dorm room?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there has to be some places where you can just kind of let go.
And I think,
um
don't you have to? I think I'm just looking at what I did. Like I had to advocate for myself a lot. And I did go against the grain a lot of
mhm,
times. I mean, I'm known for that. So I was never too shy, I think, starting in college, about just expressing, like, well, that's not how I work, or that's not how I think, or I know what I need to do to sort of be successful. I joke and I say that, like I have everything lined up in my closet or in my bathroom so that it goes in order. Maybe it doesn't look like that, right? But when I go to hotels, I'm like, do not come in and clean my room because it's going to take me double the time to get ready. I have everything in order, almost like what you do with kids who are neurodivergent when they're young, where you have flashcards that are like, okay, first you get dressed, then you do this, then you do this. I
yes.
have the adult version of
Yes.
get ready cards, the way that I have set up my whole entire environment. So that way I don't have to spend cognitive effort on maybe something that comes naturally to everybody else. I have to configure my things to facilitate that.
Mhm.
And I don't want to have to do that every single day, because now I can't use my cognition for the things that I think that I can contribute, that because of the way my brain operates,
Yes.
other people don't work this way. So I
Yeah.
oftentimes get people that say, are you a witch? Do you have ESP? Like, how do you know this? And
Yes.
it's just because I see things that other people
Mhm.
just don't notice. They're there. I'm not making these things
Yeah.
up, right? That's how it works, but that's because I'm able to conserve energy. So I would recommend to people, first is do what you need to, even if it looks odd to other people. It doesn't matter. It's for you. They're not the ones paying your bills or whatever it is. So they don't get to have an opinion. And I remember just saying to some of my professors, well, that's not how I work, or that's, for my master's degree. And, I did a lot of bench science in the lab. And I just said, well, I'm doing it this way. Well, that's not how we do things. Okay. But if at the end I get to the same place, I'm going to do things my way. Right. And
Mhm.
it works. And so sometimes you have to challenge authority. Sometimes you have to
Yeah.
challenge rules or constraints that don't serve the original purpose, sometimes, of why they were
Yes.
created. So I teach a psychological safety session. And in one of those sections, I teach understand rules so that you know when and how to break them. And not
Yes.
because I'm just trying to create a bunch of rebels, but sometimes we have to challenge and rules and
Mhm.
break them. I mean, when I started working, I had to wear pantyhose. That was required for women. Like, we look at that now and say, oh my goodness, that's just ridiculous. Well, somebody had to break a rule. Somebody had to push back. So I think that advocating for yourself, especially when it makes a
Mm.
difference on how you're going to function, we need to push against some of those constraints so that we
Yes.
can make change happen. So that's
Yes. Absolutely. Poetry snaps to all of that. And I think about, college is the place and time. Well, I mean, maybe if you're going at a time that's not in your 20s, but for many people who are going to college, like kind of out of high school into college, college is a great time to be weird and experiment
Mhm,
with things because that's socially acceptable, right?
mhm,
In 20s, it's socially acceptable to kind of be trying on different personas as people find themselves.
mhm,
And one of the things that I found about being like a late identified person in my 40s is I feel like I'm going through all of the social awkwardness of like puberty and adolescence in my 40s.
mhm,
And so collectively it's not socially acceptable for me to be like awkward and trying out different like hairstyles and colors
mhm,
and
mhm.
things to do. And yet also I'm not going to apologize for doing this work of finding myself because I spent 42 years not being
Mhm.
fully me. And
Yeah.
that was exhausting and
Yes.
unsustainable. And
And
I
it's
I
bad for
burnt
your
out on
health.
all the things.
I
Yes.
really believe that some of my health issues have come to the forefront because I have suppressed so much and denied so much. And I wanted to mention this idea of, you mentioned something about not feeling hunger or pain, when you're masking, and there's so much dissociation. I mean, to not authentically be who you are, you almost have to dissociate from that,
Mhm.
and you can't selectively dissociate. So when I have got a certification in traumatic stress studies because I want to make sure that the work that I do is trauma informed when I go into organizations. I mean, most people have had some degree of trauma, and when you've experienced trauma, or when you are not wanting to be yourself for whatever reason, there's a degree of dissociation, and that
Mm.
dissociation isn't selective. And so then what ends up happening is not only do you dissociate from unpleasantness, perhaps of trauma or pain or something along those lines, but then you dissociate from things that you want to remember and things that you want to experience. You can't say, I want to dissociate from this and not this. It's really hard for the brain to do that. And so then what
Mm.
happens is I noticed that I got really good at dissociating. Where it became like a natural strategy anytime that I was
Mm.
experiencing discomfort. And I did EMDR therapy, which is great for trauma and for people who have experienced a lot of dissociation. And it wasn't pleasant. It's not fun to get back into your body and feel things that have accumulated for decades, right? And it's
Yes.
so much work, and I would just say, "Why am I paying for this?" as I would drive there. Um, and and I'm about to restart EMDR again because I feel like coming out, right? Coming out as
Mhm.
a lesbian, it's resulted in my family changing, right? I mean, I
Mm.
let my husband know, hey, like, my kid, I have two kids. I now have a partner, and, I'm finding all of these new things within myself. So Jennifer, it feels like I'm
Yes.
starting, I make up things like I'm re-virginated. I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, like, but it's like none of
Yes.
this other stuff counts before because that wasn't me. That wasn't the real me.
Yes.
This is the real me. And so I am going through this process of discovery, and I have to be in my body to do that. And in order to
Mm.
do that, you have to confront sometimes painful things and uncomfortable things. But then you get to also rediscover or discover new
Yes.
things that you never knew were there. And it really is an amazing process. So the only like regret I have is, oh, why did it take me so long to get here? Like
Right.
I could have really
Yes.
been living this life so many more decades. And so anyway,
Yes.
I think that's really important for people to realize that, yes, dissociation serves you. The system does it for a reason. It is a survival technique, but there are going to be costs and consequences associated with it. And so, I'm not going to tell people don't ever dissociate. Sometimes dissociation is necessary. But if you're at a place in which you're ready to be more authentic and get in tune with yourself, you've got to be in your body. And so that is not necessarily an easy process. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Man, yeah, I think about there's a lot of grief that comes with coming into this into so many identities later in life, of the lost time
mhm,
of like, wow, I often feel like decades behind my peers of like where I should be, in like professional
mhm,
development or personal development. And and again, like coming into awareness of my autistic ADHD provided clarity. So I am no longer kind of down on myself for being behind. It's I was lacking key pieces of information on how my operating system works. And so I couldn't progress. I was constantly having to do maintenance because I was fixing it with the wrong tools.
yeah.
Um, and so, it's not running smoothly.
But we're
I'm
not behind, Jennifer. So, like, I have to keep reminding myself we're not behind, because we're it's like comparing apples and oranges.
yeah,
The neurotypical world defines and puts these constraints and expectations based on what? Like, who made those up, right?
right.
So you're behind if you choose to use those definitions or those constraints or expectations. But if you toss all of those out and you create a new purpose for yourself and new expectations around understanding yourself. I mean, if you want to be self-actualized, dissociation and not understanding yourself is not part of that, right? So if you really want self-actualization and sustained happiness or meaningfulness, which doesn't it's not always happy, meaning having a meaningful life, right?
Oh yeah.
Then you are not necessarily going to live up to the expectations that have been defined out there. You get to create your own expectations. And if
Yes.
you really believe in that, you won't care about these other expectations out there. I mean, that's the great thing. I think that's part of why you see more um, gender fluidity, um,
Mhm.
sexual orientation fluidity in people who are neurodivergent, know they're neurodivergent, is because there's less concern for out there and what the standards are, what the norms are, because we already fall outside the norms in so many ways that it's just one more thing, right? And so
Yes.
it's not like, okay, autistic people somehow are more queer, like, just no, they're just more willing to be introspective,
Mm,
perhaps, find their truth, and not care about the expectations of people out there to live their truth. So the rates are probably
mm,
the same. It's the inability to perhaps, or just you can't fathom going in within yourself and saying, oh, it's so much harder to go against the norms. It is.
yes,
I'm not going to even try to sugarcoat that at all. It is way harder to go against
yes,
norms. It's harder to travel as a gay couple to countries where it's illegal, or to countries where you have to think about your life being threatened, or
right.
at risk, things I didn't have to think about before. I'm still the same person, but now my risks of getting,
Mhm,
a hate crime or something against me have gone up, and I'm still me. And so,
right.
yeah, there are risks in that. But I will tell you, this is just my experience, the payoff and the things
Mm,
that you discover when you allow that to happen about yourself, I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. Not more money,
absolutely.
not more countries that I can travel to. I wouldn't trade it. And so I know that
Yeah.
everyone has to do it in their own time. So I'm not pushing anyone to do it. I do realize that there are really difficult situations. And if you live in one of those countries, what do you do? Where you
Mhm.
literally might get cut off from society, and we depend on connection to survive. So I don't know
Yeah.
if you felt that, Jennifer, in this process.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that's why my brain came up with the term neurodefiant, which was kind of
Mm.
accidental. I was telling somebody, so I'm pretty sure I'm neurodefiant. And they're like, what is that? I was like, like ADHD, they're like neurodivergent. And I was like, what did I say? You said neurodefiant.
Ooh,
So
I like it.
that's become my that's become my adopted term because I'm reclaiming that as like, yeah, I'm defying the norms. We are defying the norms in having the audacity to be ourselves and become ourselves against so many systems that are not designed by us or for us or to support us. I want to keep an eye on time and be respectful
Ooh.
of everyone's coming and going. So before we wrap up, I want to ask you two questions, Raquel. One, what what is a hope that you have for neuro inclusion in 2024 and
For the
beyond?
world, for like the world, Jennifer, or
I mean, go as big or as little as you want.
I really hope that we can leverage, technology or even AI.
Mhm.
AI has perhaps downsides, and for a while I was like all, bug about it. But I do see these glimmers of perhaps being able to remove some constraints or biases or stereotypes or some of these rules, to be more open to, a more, not just neuro inclusive, just
Mhm.
inclusive of who people are as human beings, right? So I just finished writing my second book, and I didn't have a title for it. Like, I finished the whole book, I had no title, and I was just, what do I do, and then finally it hit me. And the title of the book, it'll be coming out soon, is Job Title Human. And that's sort of my hope, is that we see each person for who they are. They bring their lived experiences, they bring expertise, they bring, um, you know, traits and values and vision and, maybe curiosity, a love of learning. There are all kinds of things. And traditionally, I never used resumes when I looked at, hiring people, because I want to know who they are. And I'm really hoping that the world can move in this
Mm.
direction of looking at individuals as humans. We all have something to contribute. We're all enough. None of us are too much. We may not always jive with everybody else, but we all have something to offer. And if we can step back and just look at rules or constraints or policies or procedures and say, am I excluding somebody out of this because of this?
Mm.
Does this still need to be like this? Does it need to be in this format? Why did we create this in the first place? Because a lot of times when I go into organizations, they're doing DEI, but the very first, like, if you just take a look at any of their simple systems, they're already not inclusive. They're already not inclusive.
Yes.
And sometimes they can't do that. They need somebody to come in that has your expertise or has this perspective to help them see something that they can't see. You
Mhm.
can't see everything. That's the thing. And that's why diversity is so important. So that's my hope, is that we can move in that direction and we can leverage AI and technology to help us do that.
That's amazing. So you said your book is coming out later this year.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds
Yeah.
like we need to have you back when it comes out so you can talk about it.
Yay.
We can talk about it and let everybody know. I'm so excited. Just I could nerd out talking with you about neuroscience and brains and trauma and transforming the world for days. So thank you so much for being here
Thank you.
and sharing this space. I'm going to make a point to go back, and I know we didn't get to all the questions and comments, so we can go back to those this recording stays on different social platforms, as well as goes into my YouTube channel. So be able to find it later on. Um, and to find Raquel, you can find her at Revitalize Project on Instagram and various social media platforms. So check that out and be sure to connect.
Thank you, Jennifer. You are amazing. I adore you and all the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Likewise.